Hello and welcome. Thanks for tuning in for the very first episode of our new limited series podcast for the Stoke-on-Trent Community of Practice, which we have called A Shock to the System. I'm Lee Dale, Community Recovery Coordinator for Changing Futures.
And I'm Sophia Federovich, the Learning Lead for Stoke-on-Trent Community of Practice. Across this series, we'll be joined by some inspiring guests to have honest conversations as we shine a light on the challenges in practice for people working in the multiple disadvantage field.
A community of practice brings people together to learn, to reflect and act. Ours unites frontline workers, people with lived experience and others across health, social care, housing and the voluntary sector, all focused on improving support for people experiencing homelessness, substance use, domestic abuse, health challenges or involvement with the criminal justice system.
We're here to ask tough questions, challenge assumptions and share real stories about what works and what doesn't work. Our aim is to shift practice to spark ideas, action and solidarity, whether you're a practitioner, a policy maker or someone currently navigating support.
And to help us unpack all of that, we're happy to be joined by this week's guests, two seasoned change makers, Julian Corner and Myron Rogers. I'm going to just move a little bit forward really, and I want you guys to think about, in terms of systems change activities and projects, what does failure look like? Is there any sort of indication around failure? And what does success look like? And how do we sustain success?
Can I give you a little failure story?
Yeah.
So I think we might have discussed this, but for some reason, starting about 2 or 3 months ago, people started asking me to talk about failure in change efforts. And some of these were like formal settings to come, facilitate a dialogue about it or whatnot. And others were just, people I'm working with, clients, friends, whatever, who are asking about, what about failure? Why do things fail all the time? And so I started paying attention to these conversations, and one of the things that happened was I realized there was a pattern in this. So the pattern was that everybody wants to talk about failure, and they have a story, a powerful, passionate story that they're just really after, and they can tell you this whole thing about change. And then you ask them, well, what does success look like? And say, oh, it's this, nirvana out there that is really quite, I don't mean to make fun of it actually, it is a kind of nirvana. It is, it has the quality of relationships, it has freedom, it has liberation of people to do their work as they see fit, there's exchange of knowledge, there's equity, all the kinds of things that you need. So I just want to say that failure story and that success story I've heard for 50 years. It's the same thing all the time. So the question is, why don't we become that success story? Why don't we have that, since we all know what it is, what it is? And for me, the things that's missing is the piece in the middle. It's how we do this work that gets us to that future. The future that we're sitting in, that is really the present, future that we're sitting in right now, we've made by working together in a way, in a how, I guess I'd say, that produces this particular outcome. So, for me, there's a failure, there is a kind of a lack of ownership that everything we do matters, right? We just don't know how.
Your thoughts, Julian?
I think nobody working in complex systems is ignorant of the case for change. It's always present. There is always critique. There is always pushback. So no one's sitting around thinking, we've nailed this. The system is exactly as it should be. I don't need to change a thing. So the case for change is ever present. And then most of the failure that we see tends to be when what I would describe as the system tries to perform change, not actually do the change. So people feel a pressure to change, and they try to demonstrate that things are changing. because that's what's expected of them. You know, they a lot of us are people pleasers, so we try to pour oil over troubled waters by trying to demonstrate that things are changing. And essentially what they're trying to create is a slightly better version of the same thing. And so when I say performing change, I mean, what is the smallest action that I can take to demonstrate that I've understood that change is needed, but that has the least consequence for me and this organization. And so the times when I've seen system change be really successful is when those involved have felt it in their gut. So I earlier talked about the need for critical analysis, but that critical analysis doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from conviction. It comes from deep conviction of who you are, what you're about, and a conviction that what you're experiencing around you doesn't align with values and so on. And so people who are coming at this with conviction, and I am going to make a case for courage, because I think change does take courage if you're up against the powers that be. You're entirely right, Myron, that it shouldn't take courage to act with integrity, but that the courage is often the courage to confront yourself and some of the norms that you have are internalized and absorbed, and acknowledge that you've got it wrong, or the way that you're operating isn't in the interests of other people, and that you might be causing harm rather than your intended good. So when it works, it is led by people with that kind of conviction, who are prepared to follow through with rigor and integrity. Okay, if change is needed, what will it actually take? Almost like a kind of following it through systemically. So I'm thinking of a kind of project that I saw in Glasgow, where essentially the commissioners acknowledged that the way that they were commissioning was fundamentally at odds with what was needed on the ground, but they didn't know what a better version of it looked like. And so essentially, to Myron's kind of top through to bottom, they inverted the power pyramid. So those who were calling the shots were the frontline workers, who were freed up to work out what was actually required, through a process of inquiry, probably through a community of practice. Their managers were then charged with working out what would it take to enable those people to do the work that they say is needed. Their senior managers were then, what are some of the rules in this system that are getting in the way of what the frontline work? So their job was to change the rules in line with what was being perceived on the ground, not to send down the rules, but to there's a feedback loop there, taking up the intelligence from the frontline and specifically charged with shifting those rules. But that requires everybody in that small system to be coming at this with conviction, and to be prepared to have some courage, but also so what are the other qualities that are present there? There's an authorizing environment, so there's safety, there's some kind of container, there's some kind of shared purpose and shared value base between all of those people, because you chuck anybody in there and the thing will go wrong. People have to know that what this thing is that they're part of, that it is safe and contained, and that everyone's got the same rough idea, and that there is a kind of shared understanding of what the processes are. So I do this thing up here and I send this up the chain, and there's a kind of agreed protocols for this is your responsibility, this is your responsibility. So yeah, there's all sorts of things at play there, but I hope it's clear that there's nothing performative about that. It is not trying to come at a better version of the same thing. It's really trying to start with, as with all of these things, what is the nature of the value that we're trying to create day to day in our interactions, and how do we follow through that value through the rules and norms of these various institutions so everything lines up.
Wow, thank you very much. That was quite a response.
I do want to say that I agree with you about courage.
Yeah.
However, it's because it is both. But the balance of that is very tricky to get. So courage can be used as a, you weren't courageous enough, and that's why it didn't work. Okay, yeah. It can be another thing that we use to blame one another. Yeah.
I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction, if I may. I'd like to get your thoughts on how people with lived experience of multiple disadvantage can contribute towards this nirvana that we're working towards.
Well, I mean, I would really start with, going back to something Julian said, it'd start with the knowledge, the experience, the wisdom of being actually the very thing that you want to support differently, being, what it is you need to be different in the world, to serve you and to create it, to support you in a world that actually works. I mean, that certainly would be a starting place for me, is just the acknowledgement of, that whole thing about inverting power, that we are actually the powerful in this, we who are severe and multiple disadvantaged, then we're where we should be in that system. I don't know, I'd go to...
Yeah, I'd probably answer this very differently these days than I would 5-10 years ago. And I'm going to reference capitalism. The way that capitalism keeps us separate from each other, stratifies society, so there's us and them, there's the wealth holders, there's the workers, there's the people who own the capital and the people who are scraping by on a wage. The way that capitalism keeps us all in competition with each other, keeps us trying to survive in this world rather than thrive together, has thrown us together in massive cities, kind of hubs of capital, where we don't actually know our neighbours, and we're living in anonymity and often loneliness. And the reason why I'm referencing a lot of these things is because when it comes to this territory that we're talking about and lived experience, in a different world, we wouldn't have practitioners and people with lived experience, or service users is another phrase that we use. We wouldn't have that separation between human beings. We wouldn't have services and communities. We would just have people who are looking after each other, who aren't so caught up in trying to get by and survive in the system, that they don't have time for each other, that all of the ties in communities have frayed so much that we have to invent and impose interventions in order to help people who are struggling most in this system. And so for me, the term lived experience, which can mean very, very different things to different people. Lived experience means, what's it actually like to live in this society where there's so much fracture and separation and pressure, and what are the consequences of that when it doesn't go well for you? And that isn't just, how can I use my lived experience in order to get a better service arrangement for myself. It's also, often people with lived experience have things to tell us about human value, the value of community and relationship, and so aren't just you know, people who show up to meetings trying to advocate for, you know, a particular rule to be changed, albeit, as I said before, that level of system change is incredibly important. It's often that they're the people who haven't bought into this system that has got created around them, and so can come in and bring a different quality of appreciation of what this thing is. And so you're sitting in a room with people whose jobs are pretty bureaucratic, pretty rule-laden, usually pretty risk and fear-based, trying to be competent, and into the room walks people whose lives have been dramatically different, have seen the consequences of the way all of the system works, and can speak to a different understanding of what makes life worth living and how to flourish in this life, and the consequences of not doing that. So, you know, what I would have said 5 or 10 years ago, which is still true, is that, you know, your day-to-day experience of this system is vital data that needs to be heard by the people who who have power to make decisions in this system, and many of the very, very best innovators, trailblazers that we have seen through our work at Lankelly Chase have been those with direct lived experience of the very thing that they're trying to change. So that isn't just that they're fueled by a passion to get things done, but they have seen it. They've seen it, and they know what needs to shift. You know, if you in many areas of the private sector, the people who are innovating products are those who have used those products, know that they're crap, and have thought of a better way of doing it because they've been on the receiving end of this, and they've said this thing is rubbish. There should be a better version of this, and they've gone out and made one and taken over the world with their new version of this. You know, there are very few innovations in the private sector that come from somebody who has never experienced the thing, thinking those people over there need a better version of these things. It's usually somebody who is on the receiving end of crappiness, thinking of a better way of doing it. And so, yeah, for me, lived experience is the oxygen, the fuel in the process of transformation, all the way through from, you know, the human energy, the vision, all the way through to the expertise in the minutiae of what could be different.
Exceptional response.
Brilliant.
I know.
Could I just add a couple of things? One is, I am with you with the critique of capitalism and what all it produces, and have written about it, and it's, you know, this is the mechanistic worldview, and among other things, and on all the harm it creates. Well, I agree with that. What I'm not quite as sure as you are of, if it went away, it would be replaced by love. So anyway, that's just something to hold there. Is, you know, we don't know what it is we might make differently, and which is an opportunity to be differently in this. The other issue for me is that the processes we are using to solve any problem or to deal with any particular issue have certain kinds of rules behind them that are linked to capitalism. They're linked to being separate. They're linked to competition and whatnot. And so how do you challenge the processes that we're engaged in to how we do anything, so that inviting in each other, whatever the position is, inviting in each other is a requirement that we know, we accept, we generate. It's some positive movement of these people, this group of people, me, all these people. We have to come together in designed conversations that allow us to speak and be heard, and to hear each other. And that, you know, those kind of, I mean, in some ways, Julian, you know, I experience what you're saying right now as being the macro level, the view of the world. What I'm talking about right now is the micro level, which both of which are at play. You know, the micro level of, you know, how do we have this conversation together in a way that replicates what it is we're trying to become? And so, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got a bit of a weird and wacky question now, really, when I'm trying to... I hear a lot about artificial intelligence and the role potentially that's going to play in supporting people. I mean, have you got any ideas of how artificial intelligence may support systems change in the future?
Yeah. Well, so now everything is AI, right? Everywhere we go. You know, by the time this thing airs out there, it might be something different. I don't know. You know, at my age and experience, it's not such a big thing. I'll only be impacted by it for a short while in my life. But excuse me. But I do. So one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is how will it be able to do a variety of very creative kind of things? Let me just go to communities of practice for a minute. One of the issues, or one of the great gifts of communities of practice, the discovery of communities of practice, and then the intentional use of them. One of the great gifts is the recognition that the majority of knowledge we have to be able to be together, to do anything, to perform anything, the majority of knowledge that we have is tacit. It is not explicit. And once it becomes explicit, it's sort of like, you know, Carl Jung, the psychologist, talked about the unconscious as being the ocean, which constantly, you're never in the same ocean, right? It's constantly regenerating itself. The water is coming up, it's a different set of waters. It's still the ocean, it's a different set of waters. So the tacit knowledge is like that as well, is that you hold some ways of understanding how to do something that no one else does. You can tell them how to do it, but you're not telling the truth because the tacit knowledge is hidden from you, right? It's that. So AI, well, how does AI deal with that? I don't know. It doesn't look promising to me because you know, the explicit stuff that is used for creativity and for a variety of different things is only part of the story, and the tacit stuff is really, you know, it's much deeper in that. So.
Have you got any final thoughts on the AI question, Julian?
I would. My understanding, and I'm not deep into AI, but my understanding is that AI can generate brilliant analysis and visions of what is needed, of a better looking world. That might take a room full of people weeks to come up with, and maybe still not get there. And it can do it in minutes rather than weeks. And I guess there is a place for that. You know, there's a place for if AI is somehow a compendium of human thought, but without humanity's egos and disorders and conflicts and so forth, and you just release the wisdom that has been compiled to produce something, then your answer is going to be pretty elevated. And yeah, as I say, there's probably a role for that, and putting that into, oh, this is what's possible, and this is what human intelligence at its best can come up with. The problem is that humans weren't involved in the creation of that, and somehow that's got to land back into human relationships, egos, disorders, conflicts, and so on. And so showing us what might be possible if only we could get over ourselves has a seems to me to have a purpose, but in order to push us or nudge us into taking on, so what is stopping us as a group of people or as a sister ecology of people living up to that vision that has come from human wisdom somehow, but we don't seem to be able to do it amongst ourselves because we're continually trying to dominate each other or compete against each other. We're coming here loaded with suspicion and distrust. And so I think that the main purpose for me would be to almost hold up a mirror to what it is that the work that we need to do as a collective in order to get to that place.
We've covered a lot of ground today. System change can be very complex, but understanding it is key to making a real difference. We hope the conversations have given you plenty to reflect on. A big thank you to our guests, Julian Corner and Myron Rogers, for sharing their thoughtful insights. It's been a real pleasure.
And thank you to the people and partners who make this podcast possible. Thank you to Changing Futures, the National Lottery Community Fund, and the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Next month, we'll be joined by Claire Ritchie and Darren Marinas to dive into the topic of stigmatising language in the sector. In the meantime, you can keep the conversation going by visiting the Expert Citizens website and going to the Community of Practice Resource Bank to find resources from our guests, the Stoke-on-Trent Community of Practice, and other brilliant resources to support you in creating your own little pocket of shocking the system.